Let's get analysis of the situation from Peter Salisbury. He is a senior research fellow for Middle East and North Africa programme at Chatham House here in London. Peter, good to have you with us. So 10,000 people have now died in this conflict, and yet Yemen doesn't seem to be a priority, at least for most Western powers. Given the scale of what's going on there, should it?
Well, the first thing to note is that in the reports we're seeing today, yes, there's an estimate of 10,000, but the UN is openly admitting that the figure is likely much, much higher. They think that they're probably underreporting on the number of civilian deaths, and these are deaths reported in hospital are not linked to things like hunger and malnutrition. So this really is a huge crisis, huge humanitarian crisis, as well as a crisis caused by just the direct effects of the war, and the UN is calling it one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world. So yes, put simply, we should be paying more attention.
The conflict itself is often portrayed as a war between two distinct groups, but the reality is actually much more complex than that, isn't it? There are various alliances, tensions, regional proxies, so that must mean that it's much, much harder to solve.
That's quite right, and unfortunately at the moment one of the problems the UN has is attempting to mediate between the legitimate government, which was ousted from the capital in early 2015, and this alliance of rebel groups in the the northwest of the country. But while they're trying to do that, and that's a very difficult mediation process, they're also coming to recognize that there are multiple different groups on the ground fighting each other for very different reasons, be they ideological, local, tribal, and even if you unpick that top level, that national level conflict, there's a very high likelihood that conflict will continue at the local level.
I mean, there is a peace plan that's been proposed, isn't there? It doesn't seem to have got very far, but given the fact that there are children starving to death here, what can be done? Can the UN Security Council be doing more? Should there be more pressure brought to bear on Saudi Arabia or on the Houthis?
I think one of the problems the UN faces at the the moment is that there are so many conflicts in the region that are taking up their attention, and the Yemen conflict involves not just a complex internal set of actors, but also a complex international environment where the US and the UK, for example, want to be seen to be allies of Saudi Arabia, which is backing one side of the conflict, but at the same time want to see it ended. And they're finding it very difficult to find the middle ground, and I think that the UN, the mediators involved, are finding it very difficult to find that middle ground and find a deal that satisfies international interests, regional interests, and the different parties to the conflict. So again, it is very, very complicated and will require a great deal of time and effort to unpick. And right now, it's also important to remember that none of the parties to the conflict seem to think that they've lost enough to consider a real compromise.
Indeed, and meanwhile, that appalling situation on the ground continues. Peter, thank you. Peter Salisbury there from Chatham House.